You're watching Two on One, the internet's top sensation, where two disciples theologians talk to a theologian about the pop culture topic of his, her, or their choosing. Hi, I'm one of your co-hosts, the Reverend Arthur Stewart.
Oh, and I'm your other co-host, the Reverend Stephanie Kendall.
Well, it's good to see you, Stephanie.
It's good to see you too. It's good to be seen. Did you call me Steph?
I called you Stephanie. I do not call you Steph. That is not your name. That is not.
No, I know, but like you also don't call me Stephanie, which is why I was like, "What is happening? Like, what a weird." You generally call me Spiff. That's why.
Okay, well, I know, but I like to change things up ever so often.
Do you like to change things up? I love that about you. You know, it's a really great way to change things up.
How's a really great way to change things up?
By going to Jeff Wunrow, our lead sponsor, because he can help you change up your liturgical textiles.
Yeah, for 16 years, at least 16 years, Jeff Wunrow Designs has been crafting liturgical textiles, everything from frontals, paraments, altar accessories, processionals, chasubles, copes, miters, face masks, and of course, stoles as well. We focus a lot on stoles on the show, and that's because they're beautiful, and we have them, and we like them.
It's true, we do. And Jeff's, I'm an Enneagram 3. We all know this. We talk about this. The way in which he crafts his stoles, they're so beautiful. They tell the story that I want to tell of God. I'm eyeing this one right now, which is, it's a Mother Mary one, a culturally appropriate tones of skin. It is beautiful, and I'm just like itching to buy it. And I'm like, ooh, I feel like this would be a really good Advent stole, because also I know Arthur loves Advent.
Advent is coming if you're
Advent
not ready.
Is advantageous for all of us who love Jeff Wunrow. But I really am looking at this.
Yes.
Yeah. So anyways, I'm grateful that he is our lead sponsor, but like in full transparency and truth, I go there often looking for stoles for myself, for others. I have like a Pinterest list in which I'm like, I want this one. So if you are like me and just love a good stole, want to make sure that the things you wear speak theologically about who you are and the work you and God are doing together, be sure to go over to jeffwunrow.com, JEFFWUNROW.com, and use our promo code 2on115 for 15% off your entire stole order.
2 on 1 is characters of the letter variety. 1-5 is characters of the digit variety. We're going to put it up on the screen right here, but if you're one of our listeners, drop us an email at 2on1project@gmail.com if you need help spelling it, and we'll be glad to help you out.
So happy to help you, but be forewarned, if you do reach out, we will also be sure that you have a link to our upcoming new book, which is
we have a book coming out?
We have a book coming out in October that you can pre-order. I've seen it. I've held it in my hands. It is beautiful and lovely. The stories in it are of God and for God's people, and really tell a beautiful story about how God is currently at work in the world of pop culture, and kind of what we do here on 2 on 1. So
it's called Are You Still Watching? Using pop culture to tune in, find God, and get renewed for another season. We have 12 contributors in this book, including Stephanie and myself. Just called you Stephanie again. It is weird. Spiff.
It is, right? It's fine. I mean, I don't care, but it's just kind of weird. The book is great. We love it, not just because we're a part of it, but if you are a pastor out there, a regional minister, a GMP, I don't know, hey Terry, if you are part of a pop culture group, if you are an actor, hey Ted, the team of Ted Lasso, or whoever, pick up this book. There are questions at the end of each chapter that help you either individually or in collectives think theologically about what we're talking about. It's a great resource. It's a great read. 10 out of 10, highly recommend.
Yes. I also give it 10 out of 10.
Oh, good.
And I would, even if I weren't a contributor and editor. Okay. Hey, let's bring in our guest. I'm super excited that he is with us today. And we've got Pastor Jason Reynolds joining us from San Jose. Jason, welcome to 2 on 1.
Well, thank you.
Lovely
I'm so glad to see you.
Yeah.
I'm especially excited because Spiff, there's been so many times I've been a 7 with 2 3s. Jason is a 7 on the Enneagram too.
So as we said for the DeLeslin Kennebrew episode, buckle up, my friends. It's going to be an energetic episode. I can already feel it and tell it, because I love me some 7s in my life. We all need them.
So Jason, who are you? What do you do? And why are you here?
So I am Jason Reynolds. I'm the senior pastor of Emmanuel Baptist Church in San Jose, California. Amongst a variety of other things that I do, I enjoy watching movies. I love talking about kind of not just pop culture, but themes that I see and the ways that can intersect the church, and hopefully that we can learn from, grow with, and see what God is doing. And a burgeoning movie maker. So
Yeah. Talk about
there.
that a little, would you please?
It is my belief that telling stories is just hugely important to the human experience, period. And I think trying my hand at retelling a story, which is oftentimes what I think the sermon really is, but now using visual mechanisms to try to communicate the same things. We tried our first was a Christmas story that starred my son, and I think it was great for a first movie, having never written a movie and everything. But we definitely have some place to grow as we continue to work on storytelling. So,
I love that. I too have always thought, so my first career was in theatrical marketing. I made movie trailers, which is just very much, I've always said, it's very much a sermon moment, right? We're taking a smaller piece of a larger story, hoping that people are curious enough to go get more of the story.
Correct.
So excited that you were also making movies. So yeah,
absolutely. And I'm going to notate that to come back to you. So when we need help to create trailers for the next movies, I'm like this. So Stephanie,
I can put you in contact with the people I know. I am out of that game intentionally because I am now a minister.
I volunteered to do voiceover because I'd really like to do In a World. And
I would love to get you to do the inner world. Like, it's not going to even be about a world. It's just going to be in a world where that has nothing to do with anything, where we go a totally different direction, right?
I mean, rest in peace, Don LaFontaine, who is the In a World guy. As the person who used to do all the voiceovers for Los Angeles and create and cultivate that, Arthur, I can get you hooked up with the right people.
Perfect. I will get more gravelly and intense as the day goes on. Our topic today is Kendrick Lamar. And I would actually invite you, Jason, to talk first about this topic, why you chose this artist, this pioneer, this marvel of human ingenuity.
Yeah. So, I mean, the accolades could go down for a variety of reasons, but the thing that lifted him up to me for our conversation is because of his recently dropped album. Recently, now is like a few months old, but when we started talking, and just, I think, the amazing beauty and the creativity that he brings to really difficult subjects, right? So I think, especially within the world of hip hop, there's always been kind of an underground narrative of, is this glorification or is this just communication of what is happening? And how do you walk the line of trying to tell truth, realism, while not also potentially lifting up and glorifying things that are negative? And I feel like, Kendrick has figured out an amazing way to ask these questions, to be amazingly vulnerable and honest in his depictions, even of his own personal feelings at times, and things that also seem kind of counter, and to marry both the good and the bad and them kind of marching forward together. And so, like, I feel like that is almost like the space that we're in life. And he kind of epitomizes it and does it at a very high level, from artistry, from his ability to rap. It's one thing to be amazingly artistic, but then you can't rap. And so we love your artistry, but you're just not a good rapper. But he has kind of all of that together. And so I think that presents a great opportunity. Even just from like the titles of his albums, like, are freaking phenomenal.
Like, come on now. I mean,
To Pimp a Butterfly, right? Or Damn, or Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. So, like, even from the intentionality of naming, which is to draw you into kind of like the storytelling, and using the entire album as a way to tell a story, like, it's absolutely phenomenal to me.
So I will admit I'm a neophyte in it. I listened to Pimp a Butterfly on repeat basically last week because I just couldn't stop. I had no idea he'd won the Pulitzer for it. Which makes me so happy about the Pulitzer committee, because it's the acknowledgement of, it's just brilliant.
Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
he's one of those people where I'm like, I get about 20% of this, and I love the
Mhm.
20% I understand.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Well, and he sets an entire, and I'm curious, I'm going to ask kind of, I guess, our first question, if y'all are all right with that.
Mhm.
That's just been on my mind, because I grew up on the West Coast. You know, 90s West Coast rap and R&B is my jam. Especially like 90s,
Yep.
um, and so that sits in my heart. And
Mhm.
but I love I live in New York now, so I can't, like, push aside all the good New York rappers too.
Absolutely.
We can hold
No judgment. No
we
judgment.
can hold things in tension, right? Exactly. Like, I'm a bi-coastal person. But when Kendrick hit the scene, it was a little bit for me kind of in the same way that Chance did. Like,
Mhm.
there's a leveling up that is happening and setting of a new bar, not necessarily that they're elevating the bar that was, because I think that, like, Tupac and Biggie, and they're their own bars as well, but
Mhm.
Kendrick has set a bar of excellence
Mhm.
in all the ways in which you have named, that both are um, uh, that are hard for some people to acknowledge, because we get
Mhm.
stuck in these
Genre.
I love 90s West Coast rap or whatever
Mhm.
right? There's a comfort level of this, and he has raised that bar so high and set this
Yeah.
expectation of what it means for artistry, for intentionality, for
Absolutely.
practice and
Yeah.
utilization of the art,
Yeah.
in a way that I think it's overlooked. And I'm curious what you think that has to say to the church, because I think often we too get stuck in a space of comfortable discomfort.
Absolutely.
Like, this is the level of discomfort I'm okay with, especially maybe for
Absolutely.
white people. But Kendrick is really doing something new. And so for you, how do we see the church being able to utilize that for
Yeah.
maybe growth?
And so first, I think it is amazingly hard to do this, right?
Mhm.
So, like, it's almost weird. It's like asking people to be Michael Jackson. You know what I'm saying? Like, it is like you meet these kind of like once in a generation, once in a lifetime, phenomenal talents that also have like the way to marry their souls and their being to their art, to their art. And then it's almost like saying, hey, everybody, try to figure out how to do this. It's almost like, I'll never be able to do it like that, right? However, I think you are right to say that there is this idea of pushing. How do we push the envelope? How do we expand what may be comfortable? And not even what's comfortable, how do we wade into the uncomfort, right? Especially, I think, in this time, in our era, I feel like a lot of life is just far more uncomfortable. Like, I can think back to, the good old days are always better back, right? And I think they're really only good because we know them. We know what to expect, right? We know how to deal with that. Like, we can wrap our mind around what it was. I think the challenge of our newness is that we don't know, and everything feels uncomfortable. We feel so, non-stable. And so I feel like what his music is doing, it is trying to stabilize the non-stable. I want to stabilize the fact that there are terrible things that are happening in the city while there are also beautiful things, right? We're pimping a butterfly. Like, we look at the inner city, we look at the violence, and we think it's all bad, when the truth is these are all caterpillars that could become amazing butterflies. However, there are things and mechanisms around them that make that very, very difficult, right? I really am a good kid, but the city around me is mad, right? And so what do you think that's going to do for me? It's going to drive me crazy. And so then you wind up saying, damn, what can I do? Like, it's like, even like all of his CDs are like telling the story. And then you get there, I want to be Mr. Morals, right? I really want, but then I also want to live the life of the big steppers, right? I want to have what they have, the beautiful cars. And so I feel like it's that duality, if you will, that's constantly there. And I think the church can learn from that. The idea of how do we push into areas that may be more uncomfortable, ways of life, even our own understanding. How do we hold to the space of venerating things that can still be holy, while also recognizing that we ourselves are not the holy one, right? And so, you can kind of be both and. And what I've loved about him, and I take courage in it, is he gives me more courage to make mistakes, Not make mistakes for mistakes' sake, right? But really be trying to move in the right direction. And you may bump into some things. You may think something. You may say something. It is amazingly offensive. It hurts somebody. And the goal was not for hurt. It's actually for learning. And then we can learn from that. We can become better because of it. But I don't become better if I'm too scared to say it and acknowledge where I really am, right? And I think that's kind of the other part of it. Like, we got to the point where now people just don't really tell you the truth. So now we know people even less. And that's an even more unstable world. Because at least, I'd rather know where you stand and I can kind of deal with that. Now I don't really know what that means. We all kind of use the same words, but those same words mean very different things to everybody. And so I don't even know all the landmines to watch out for anymore. So I hope that kind of answered the question.
So what I've just heard in this, and you just kind of made something click for me, is it's not solely prophetic, it's pastoral what Kendrick Lamar is doing.
Absolutely.
There's a, and I mean, living in the duality of the prophetic sermon versus the pastoral sermon, and they should be both at once, which
Correct.
doesn't always work. And what does it mean to pastor people in the unknowing, as opposed to, well, I'm on this other side and you're contained in your grief or your anxiety or your worry, and instead to say, I'm just going to walk alongside you.
Absolutely.
Sorry, that was an observation that sounded like a question. I apologize.
No, but
I do that sometimes.
But I feel like there are biblical passages that, we look back in hindsight and they feel stable. So the church kind of has this idea of running to stability, but it would have been unstable to the experience. Like, it is nowhere in the world the children of Israel marching towards the wilderness felt stable. Now we hear, oh, there was manna every day, God's provision, there was pillar of cloud by night, like we got all this great stuff. To them, the experience was amazingly unstable. Moses, you have no idea what you're doing. You're an idiot. We're walking in circles, right? We should have been there by now, right? And so that experience is very similar to where we are, yet we have to continue to walk alongside. We have to continue to move forward, even in our own unknowing, right? We may know the Holy One, but that doesn't mean we know everything the Holy One knows.
Well, I mean, within that, the Back to Egypt committee, I think, is the most honest thing in all of Scripture. And I like that the Back to Egypt committee was founded like as they were crossing the Red Sea. And it's been the constant in every religious body since then, forever, whether or not Egypt is actually part of their story.
Every nation, like, concerned citizens, we need to take back our, like, it is all the same thing. I want to go back to what I know. Like, I knew that we were going, I don't know this, I don't like it. My aunt used to always have this statement. She says, I'd rather deal with the demons I know than the ones I don't.
1000%.
Right.
Well, and I went to Israel oh gosh, a couple months ago.
Wow.
And Palestine, and it was really eye-opening for lots of different ways, but not in the ways that I had anticipated. Mm-hmm. So when you talk about like the Beatitudes and the people gathering to listen to Jesus, and I think we all kind of think of Jesus always on the mountaintop, mm-hmm. right? But in this space, he utilizes the acoustics of that space, and the people were gathering top down because they would have been coming from the villages and the mountains. So Jesus actually in actual physicality, deconstructing the power dynamic. And when you're watching people be curious about what is happening, you're watching from the top kind of gather. And I think that that's what Kendrick is doing so beautifully, is saying like, there is a new way in which to be curious towards each other, and a new way in which to understand the lived experiences that I have, my curiosities, my growth, my, learning curves, and all the things that he does and gives so vulnerably. And that's exactly what Jesus did in the, here's some experience. Here are the things. I really appreciated how you said, like, it wouldn't have been comfortable for the early here, like to do this thing, to take time out of your day from worshiping God, because they have really standards of how often you got to be in temple and how often you have to be in prayer. And you've got to, also be fishing and feeding your children and people, and the actual humanness of it. But to take time out and to listen to something new, right? Like Jesus's sermons, or the disciples sharing, or a new rapper on the scene, right? You get comfortable with you get comfortable with Jay, and all of a sudden, who isn't too far off from Kendrick and what he was doing in his early stuff and even in his more current stuff. But I think that, yeah, exactly, more current. But you just see that progression, and I want to say, like, all of a sudden you lay Kendrick on top of it to see his progression even more. And it doesn't mean that early rappers haven't made that journey. It's just that we don't have to stop where we felt comfortable. And I think I think that that's what Kendrick teaches the church, is like, you can use the things that you understand as comfortable to be a new starting point.
Yeah. And I think, if there's any difference, right? So Kendrick comes from a line, right? Like conscious rap, or the idea of expanding on real world issues to lead to something better. Man, not only from the genesis of hip hop, but there've always been like those amazing purveyors from KRS-One to, later on you have the Common Senses, the Most Defs, right? Like, so hip hop has always had like this sound, and from a variety of different places. I think the first group that did it similar was Outkast. Like, so what Outkast was able to do was they married this very rough kind of feel. You get that with Big Boy, and then you have Andre 3000, like he's out of this world. So you have this mixed into something that feels rough and tough. We talking about gang violence, blah, blah, blah. Then you have these notes of like, man, that's just crazy artistic. And then Kendrick kind of becomes Big Boy and Andre in one person.
Yes.
Right. He becomes Outkast, like in himself. Right.
Yeah.
And so he could stand with folks throwing up gang signs, and he's literally wearing a martial arts like outfit, like he's a sensei, right? Because like that was so huge and part of it. Like, the songs that he chooses from the idea of poetic justice, and that's 1993 Tupac. When it comes through, and Janet Jackson, how you marry these two lives that would have never met, but they have this overlapping connection, and that changes the way that you think about it. Like, this really is poetic justice, right? And so I think he does a phenomenal job with that. But I think he also does a phenomenal job of keeping the listener uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I feel like too much music, especially like within the industry, it's easy to make, the idea to make money is you don't want to, overly agitate the listener. Like, and going to the preacher, like we say the same thing, right? Like, nobody feels like having the after sermon conversation of, this is what your sermon said to me and it offended me, right? So, how do you walk the line finally so that you don't offend? And God forbid if they're, a high giver, or, they're very influential, or, they can, the rabble rouser that has already told you they didn't vote for you in the first place, right? Like,
oh my God. Yep.
But I feel like he's the constant push that says, if we don't keep a certain level of uncomfort, even in the audience, even in those that I need, like he acknowledges, I need you to buy my stuff. Yet I can't be controlled by if you're going to cancel me just because I said something, by if you buy my stuff. You know what I'm saying? Like, how do
he models that vulnerability that he expects from his listener. And I think that that's what good leadership in the church does as well. It's what a good sermon moment can do. I was told early on in my career, I cried too much. I'm just an emotional person. Like, if I'm too happy, I'm crying. If I'm too sad, like there's a real, like, I guess it's got to be like real stable at a 5 to not be crying. No, but I had to learn that was okay, because I have
weeping prophets in the Bible.
Absolutely. But I have been told as a woman that crying is a sign of weakness, and, that it is not a sign of leadership. It's a sign of weak leadership. Correct. Whereas when I stood up in the pulpit a couple of weeks ago and, shed some tears, just authentically, they just came about gun violence. And, if I'm not showing up authentically saying it's okay to be really sad and mad right now, and that our whole humanness is a gift and should be both modeled in the pulpit and modeled in the congregation. I'm not doing my job and you're not doing yours. And I think that that expectation from Kendrick is also present in how he leads, and how he gives of himself.
So I think there's an accountability in this. And I'm doing my own work right now about what pastoral authority is in a congregation that is marvelous and also rampantly anarchistic. It's awesome. He says, thinking of the book.
Tell me more about it.
Yeah. Right. Its authority isn't I need to have the power to do what I want. It's authority is I'm being held accountable for the work we're doing together. And I'm holding you accountable mutually as well. And I never, in my experience with just shotgunning Kendrick Lamar for the last 2 weeks, I've never thought that he is waiting for me to catch up, but he is certainly inviting me to do so.
Yeah.
And I wonder when we talk about proclamation in terms of pastoral ministry, there's the 20-minute sermon that has 3 points in a poem. I don't think any of the three of us actually fall into that trap, but perhaps we do. And perhaps that's the expectation. So what happens if it is, I know a few months ago you baked during a sermon. Is that right? You made bread, right?
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit? Because I've been
so
dying
cool
to know about it. And I think it's going to speak to the point I'm trying to formulate.
Yeah. And so, one of the things that, and I said that, Kendrick Lamar inspires me as the level of creativity. I think pastoral creativity is important, especially when we recognize that the audience, the ear, the eye, their experience is very different. Like groups don't sit and listen to messages or long sound bites, right? So like being able to grab people. So I had this desire to say, what can touch multiple senses? What could we do that not only touches the sense of like what their auditory senses, like what you can hear, then what you can see, right? So you see kind of this process, but then you smell it. Or like you bringing fresh baked bread into a space, like now you have a whole nother sense. And like how many times do you really get senses, your third sense, like, and then if we baked up enough of it, people get to eat it on the way out. Like, so now like we're rolling around, like you grab it. So like how do we bring all of these senses into this moment without making it too much performy? Like I don't want the hook and the information to take away from the deep seated message that we have sitting there. But the idea is, I was baking bread, and there are all these different processes that bread needs to go through, from kneading it, right, to how you put it together. And each of them affects how good the bread is. Any of those processes skipped will mean that you have inadequate bread. And so the same is true whether it's in our faith, in our own personal lives, right? How do we put all of these things together and use creativity to help people grab it a different way, right? Maybe a way they would have missed before, like, or they thought they knew, but just because you said it this way, it's like, it clicked. It makes sense now. This is something I can hold on to and take with me. So yes, we baked a number of things. In fact, my wife, one of the other things that we started on the show is called Heavy on the Bass. And my wife is kind of the lead at taking folks through making different meals. And we talk about faith and she leads them through that kind of conversation. But it's just another way to get people to engage, because what you may miss on the sermon, you may gain, learning how to make rosemary chicken, right? Who knows, right? So
are you allowed to say what people might miss on the sermon? Like we got to keep up the conspiracy that preaching is the most important part of what we do, right?
Absolutely. Don't get me wrong. I'm a high on the preaching guy, but I feel like
your preaching.
But I also feel like preaching becomes more effective when people know that they can trust the things that I'm saying. Like preaching in and of itself means nothing. Like pastoral authority is literally nothing save the influence that people decide to give you. Right. And once you've earned that, right? Like I feel like Kendrick now has earned a level of influence that we allow him to say things to us, because there's been a history of saying, okay, this has been good. I feel like the pastor does the same thing. The minister does the same thing. The choir person does the same thing. It takes only one bad solo for people to be like, we're not sure if Sister So-and-so ought to be the one at the microphone.
10,000%. Yeah, I mean, so Kendrick is doing something new every day and every time because it's rooted in his lived experiences. And yet I feel like the church both wants that. It's like every church I've ever talked to is like, we need the young people. We need to do the new thing. But you want to do it for a hot second. And and you may invest in it for a sermon series at most, right. But like, are we allowing it to change who we are? And I think that's what I want Kendrick to do. And I feel like that's also what Kendrick wants to do. And I feel like if if I were to ask him, that may be a way in which he would answer, like, what do you run up against? Is that like
Right.
he's, he should very well be venerated and considered amongst the top rappers. And I think he is by people who are paying attention to rap as a part of their own culture, but he should be venerated as an artist writ large that is doing something new. Right. That the people that have never listened to rap in their life should know his name.
Absolutely.
And I feel like that's the church, that's the disconnect on the church. You get some churches that are like, yes, Kendrick fans, we know what he's doing, we're in. And you get some people that are like, I heard of him, I haven't been curious enough to engage it though. And then you get the people who are not. And I'm curious what we might be able to do as faith leaders to get people more engaged and excited about long-term newness.
Yeah, I think that's an absolutely great question. And I wish I can be like, oh, got the answer. This is what
you don't have the immediate answer on how to fix
I have it not even close, right? I can think about 1,000 reasons. I'm like, well, because one thing that I hear is and envy is not something that us wonderful pastors should have, but I have it, and I'm praying that the Lord will release it. What I envy about Kendrick is he's able to take 3 years, 4 years, 5 years between projects to grow before he re-releases. And then that thing can be done for months. People can re-listen to it and it still has a benefit. I feel like the church deals with a very different model. We want something fresh, freshly baked, so to speak. We want it to be deep and we want it every single week. Ad nauseum. It does not stop. Every week we want you to be fresh. We want you to, and not only that, the community is looking like, okay, what's this week? How do we do it? And so like, not only is it short-lived, so like you could preach the best message that you've ever preached, and it was the most profound thing that God did in your life. And that happens 1 week. And the very next week, they're like, okay, get back on the field. Play again. It's, like sports, like Steph Curry has a great game. That's great, but this is a new game. But even they get the summer off, right? Like even their season is only 82 games.
Oh, my Warriors, our Warriors, I'm assuming, because I'm a Bay Area.
That's the one team that I take from the Bay because I'm a Chicago person. Okay. So I will give you the Warriors. Anything else, I will have to depart quickly.
I mean, I have a new nephew who is literally named Clay after Klay Thompson. So we are Bay Area, like I said, Giants poster. We are Bay Area support people.
Got it.
But right, you get even Steph, who everyone, is just like, he shows up. You make Steph mad. Don't make Steph Curry mad. That's the dumbest thing you can do. Like, he's just going to go off. It's like making Sue Bird mad. If anyone is watching the WNBA playoffs right now, like, don't piss off Sue Bird on her final flight, right? Like,
or Candace Parker.
Or Candace Parker. Ooh, yeah. I mean.
And we should just throw in a plug. Like, I do not think it is okay that Brittany Griner is still in jail. I just think that needs to be
we are BG hardcore, like hands down.
Like, just needs to be said.
Thank you for naming that. POTUS, we know you're a deuce watching. Clearly, the president of the United States is watching this podcast. Get Brittany out of prison. That is
we got to do something.
We have. I mean, I'm in spaces in which we are actively working towards her release. But she is for those of you that do not know, she is a queer Black basketball player who plays overseas in Russia, is unlawfully detained, has been sentenced to a 9-year prison sentence for a tiny bit of weed. Cannabis oil. It's not even like weed, for a vape pen. The whole thing is insane. We know that it is unlawful. Our government has the power to do something about it, and we are demanding that they do something. To release, not just something, to release her and bring her home to her family. And it's a call for the WNBA to pay your players, and for all women's sports organizations to play their players with equity and justice, so that we don't have to play overseas. We can play here in the States that is growing incredible athletes and incredible sportsmanship spaces. So, I can go off on Brittany Griner all day long.
Hey,
sorry.
What I was hearing about, and yes, amen. What I was hearing about taking the 5 years between it, there is this idea of like, wow, that was a really great sermon next week, and then it's like baby birds in a nest with their mouths open for the next part. So it's and I say consumerism. Like I didn't,
Absolutely.
I can consume things. I've been reading Agatha Christie novels because you can just kind of sit down and read them in a couple hours. They're a lot of fun. Couldn't tell you the difference between the four I've read in the last week. I was on a beach. That's why I had time to do this. But at the same time, like flying out to said beach, I was like, oh, I'll listen to Pimp Butterfly while reading Agatha Christie, and I needed to put everything else away. So it wasn't consuming, though I was being fed. It was experiencing it. It was participating in it. It's something
Absolutely.
of it. And so then, speaking to two really good preachers, and as somebody who considers himself a really good preacher as well, what does that mean for proclamation? Like, what can we actually take out of this idea of? So here is this completed thing, and what would it look like if we said you get one masterpiece 3 times a year? And I'm more than happy to teach other weeks, and I can knock out a series on Mark for 6 months, but you want a masterpiece, I will tell you when it is coming, because I'm going to craft it.
You're going to release it.
And then I will release it. Right. And what if it was not even like from the pulpit per se? You talk about filmmaking. We talk about podcasting. It becomes this, what if it becomes the amount of funk and soul and jazz and sampling from the entire history of Black music, in really American music, excuse me, I don't want to even make a pigeonhole.
Yeah.
It's a story that is encompassing. And do we have the room or the right or the accountability to be able to do that proclamatorily?
Listen, first of all, like that just threw off like 1,000 different like lights in my head, all these things. And
Graham 7.
A number of questions that I think I've been asking. And, primarily it is, how does the current church function? So like the idea of consumerism, turning it into and I'm not anti-weekly, right? But I am anti the expectations of what that weekly event is meant to be, right? Like we've moved further away from community in so many ways. And I think sometimes technology is far more aiding in less community than real community at times, right? But since we've gotten away from community, it's turned into events, right? Like the church service is trying to rival like a concert or a theatrical performance every single time. That's non-sustainable, right? Number one. And since we don't really do community together, then the only way that I feel that many community members feel that they benefit is from this one moment where something is proclaimed, as opposed to proclamation can also be lived, right? Like, how are we living out the proclamation together? And we all know, like anything else, nobody learns from hearing something one time. Most people don't come to or watch all of our services, everything, right? Like, what if we had, like, this is going to be our thing, and we're just going to talk about this for the next couple of months over and over again? Number one, because here, faith comes by hearing, right? Like, all of us need repetition to actually grab something. But then the expectation is not every single week. It's something new, and forget all that other stuff. It is, how do we get this message? How do we keep rolling out? How do we create opportunities to live into that, to integrate it into our lives, integrate it into our community? Because what's the point of talking about faith and it's a great message and we walk away and like, oh yeah, look at those venerated faith people. And then we walk back, and as soon as we get an extra bill that we weren't expecting, we're like this, God, why have thou forsaken me? You know what I'm saying? Like, we haven't even gotten close, right? Like, so how do we live into more of that community, I think, feel, which I think then can release amazing leaders to have space to be creative. And that doesn't just have to be in the pulpit, because, sadly enough, I think the pulpit is moving far more away from the church than we might care to acknowledge. Because we have at least 2 generations right now that if the pulpit is in the church, they're never going to hear the message anyway.
Well, and that's right. I think that goes back to what I've been thinking about, and what, like, I think Kendrick has inspired in me is that, like, you're right. You have to invest in the people that you want to come before they come. And that's what I think Kendrick is doing. It's like, here's this thing that, here's life. Here's an experience that I have lived through, that I am living through, that I'm even just maybe curious about. will you join me on that journey? But here it is for you. I have been vulnerable first. And, so many people we're talking about the nuns, and which really, let's just call them millennials. Millennials do not want to go to church writ large, right? Because we've been raised in the either shadow of or in the direct relation to church trauma. Like I was raised outside the church because my parents were traumatized by church. And so I just wasn't raised in it. And so I came to it as an adult. And so, but you're not going to get new people. Every church is like, bring the young people to us. But it's like, you don't want the young people because you want the young people to fit into your mold. You don't want the experiences of young people to shape what's next.
We need you to climb ladders to change light bulbs on our property committee. Thank you.
Exactly. Go, please.
I'm sorry. And now this is going to be like the pastor, like the frustrated pastor and me coming out too. I'm like this. But I do think it's ironic that I feel that every institution, especially within American society, has left some level of trauma. But we haven't left all institutions the same way. Like currently, the media right now, and I'm not anti-media, but the way that stories are told consistently are incorrect or misleading. But nobody has writ large walked away from media. You know what I'm saying? Like, and then the folks that try to point it out, they use it for like nefarious terms, like, what is it? The enemy of the people. Stop it. You're just being ridiculous, right? Like, however, the over sensationalism, the idea of trying to get views, right? We run off with stories before we have them. But who's holding to task? Like, we got to get back to this. There's trauma there. There's trauma in the educational system, right? Like, if you have been African-American in an inner city, you cannot tell me that there haven't been some level of trauma that you've experienced from teachers that haven't always seen you the right way, or those that didn't believe in your abilities, or those that really were trying to help you, but in trying to help you were clipping your wings, right? Mm-hmm. I don't want you to dream too high because I'm concerned that you may get frustrated or hurt, right? Like, so every single institution comes with that. Our country comes with all of these things. I think we have to remember the beauty of what is available, right? And I think even the church sometimes loses the beauty of what the faith can be, and what I believe God intends for the faith to be. Thus, it is no reason to come to it, right? Like, I got church. I'm a church boy through and through. God knows I got some church trauma, right? But I also feel like everybody has trauma. Like,
well, the church is supposed to mimic our lives, and our lives have trauma. Like, it's not a place in which we walk through these doors in which it's look at how pristine and good our lives are. It should be the place in which we turn and say, life is hard. Let's do this hard life together.
Correct.
And so, but the church wants to cover a multitude of sins with the fact that we've got Jesus, and which is Jesus would be the first to be like, let's not. Like, I talked zero about church planting and and finance and all the thing. Like, it's the relationship to each other. Bring your vulnerable here, share your vulnerable here, and hopefully you've built relationships well enough with each other that you can carry that together.
Correct. I love that. Author, your silence is concerning.
No, I'm really enjoying this. We've you want to talk about batting 1,000? We've just been batting 1,000 lately on 2-on-1, and I'm really glad about that. And we're never going to have.
Our book is batting 1,000.
Come on,
we're never going to have a bad episode ever again. No, I've been thinking about that and what it means to deal with the right. Life is, let's go full Buddhist. Life is suffering, or suffering is caused by desire and everything else. There was one lyric that has stood out to me, and I think it fits into this. It's out of the interlude on To Pimp a Butterfly. It's early on, and it's we don't censor ourselves on this, and it's a direct quote, but it's with "This dick ain't free." And Kendrick says, "I need 40 acres and a mule, not a 40 ounce and a pit bull."
Yeah.
And that has just stood out because, of course, it's I need a broken promise of something better, not the broken promise of today.
Yeah.
And there's just so much historicity into that.
Absolutely.
And I think it's the toss out of it, of when we have this trauma, I mean, how do we unpack it in a way that honors it, but
Yeah.
also dismantles it?
Correct. And not run away from it.
And not run away from it.
Like, we don't have that. And I think that's the thing that I feel like I love about Kendrick. He hasn't run away from any of it. Like, I'm not going to run away that I was misogynistic when I was younger because I'm concerned that I'm going to get canceled. I'm not there now, right? And still got some places to grow. I'm not going to run away from the fact that violence is what I know, but I know it also to be bad. But at the same time, if you come from my family, I can't tell you I'm gonna live the pacifist lifestyle. Like, even his newest like CD cover, he has the crown of thorns, right? This representation of Jesus, who we would say gives life, with a gun in his belt as he's holding his children, right? Because you're caught between, how do I live out these principles that I can hold in my head? But I know if something comes, I want to make sure I can tell my baby girl, my wife, or my, his fiance, that I'm going to take care of you, right? And I'm caught between that and trying to make what is the right decision to make, right? Or even like on his CD, Damn, his creativity is so amazing that he literally makes the CD that if you listen to it in reverse, it communicates an exact opposite of what you would have got if you listened to it forward. So the way he constructs the CD forward tells a story. It's really like, it's like Kendrick who's going through his weaknesses, right? But if you start from the back and you go the opposite way, it's Kendrick who is actually wicked. And he ends with this demise at the beginning of the first song. This is like, the fact that he was able to do this still blows my mind. However, it makes me think about perspective. Like, if my perspective is from the beginning that this is somebody trying and their progression is one way, I can see the same events completely different. But if I think they started at a different place and they're moving a different way, I can assume them to be evil, wicked, not worthy of saving, right? How does that resonate so much with, our current context, right? Who is good, who is not, right? Who is worthy of God's love? And, we never say that, but that's really what what we say when who we invite to our churches, who we send out of our churches, who is not welcome, right? Who is worthy? Who do we think is wicked, right? How do we live into all of those things? And what does that mean about us?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because sometimes, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, it reminds me of that, like, of, the come as you are phrasing that's been kind of hyper taken by spaces that don't actually mean you are welcome, right? It's the conflation of come as you are so that we can change you, not come as you are so that we can grow because we don't have you here. And it's that difference that I think Kendrick does so beautifully. In all of his spaces. And, I didn't know about the playing it backwards, which I love, but once in a young adult Bible study, we read the Passion story backwards. And so you start with the resurrection and then go backwards. And then we ended at the vote with Barnabas, or Barabbas. And so that you were left with, how do you vote? And that was where we left that, that space. And, which puts you in that wicked space or in that liberative space, right? If you read it, when you read it starting with, if you start there, right? Let's take a vote. Do you want to free? Are you the king of the Jews? Blah, blah, blah. And then you get into this, like, okay, we've made it. But if the end is there, I feel like so much of our churches, I'm an external processor and you're helping me think through this. We know the liberation that is found in Jesus, right? Like, it's just there. We know the grace, the love, the, all of it. It's there and it's known. So why do we think that we need to continue to kind of work backwards from there in all of our spaces? Because I think that what we're doing is we're resting on the laurels that we know the ending and we're reading it in one particular way so that if we were to read it backwards, it postures us in a way that we are so uncomfortable with because we're now participants in the oppressive nature of the one who liberates and saves. Because we've removed ourselves from that story so explicitly over the years that to read it backwards really places you in the center of it rather than the resurrection. And I
Yeah.
think that that's a powerful tool that Kendrick does in saying, here's the both and of my life. It's the
Absolutely.
I hold this knowledge of good and evil in myself and in the world, and how do we come together to make sure that we're reading in a similar direction for a common purpose.
And I'm sorry, I was gonna preempt a question that I figured that was gonna be coming my way soon. Is it all right that I preempt the question? Is that all right?
Always.
So
this is yours. We are simply facilitating the brilliant.
So this makes me think of a very particular biblical character, right? One.
Oh, I see what you're doing. Sorry. Let's go. If you don't mind, then we are closer to time. And so let's move into our final question and engage this a little bit.
Okay.
Deeper. Is that okay?
Let's do it.
Usually it's like a one and done, like, what is it? And then you go answer, but this will give us a little bit more time to.
I think so, because I definitely want some feedback off of this one. I think there's some stuff here.
Okay. I love it. We'll change it for you because we're into change and growth as well. So, I generally ask the final question. So, Arthur, if you're all right, I'll do it again today. So, Jason, what biblical theme, narrative, verse, character, quote, whatever, are you most reminded of through Kendrick Lamar?
So it really reminds me of King David, right? And I lift up King David because, you know, I'm in the process of, I'm doing some writing and some studying of him. And I am always amazed with how I view him today versus how I viewed him when I was a kid. When I was a kid, it was like pristine, man after God's own heart. Like, this is the way I knew him. And don't get me wrong, I mean, he made mistakes, but he was, and yet the more recent readings is, man, like there's some amazingly dark aspects of King David. And yet scripture still says, man after God's own heart. Like, man, this becomes challenging. Like, David, not only like does he take a woman Bathsheba, but then he has Uriah killed. But wait a minute, Uriah isn't just somebody. Uriah was one of David's like 37 mightiest men. One of the men that surrounded David when he was in the cave running from Saul, preserved his life. And when finally given the fruition of what they had been working for, David takes one of his closest, compadres' wives and is willing to take his life.
Well, and Bathsheba never consents.
It's a non-consensual.
Easy.
We
easy.
name
Like it is not. It is at best coercion. That is the nicest it could possibly be, and it is at worst full out rape.
Rape.
It's rape. I mean, as a woman who has been in these spaces, right? Like, if I don't consent to the ways in which someone even puts a hand on my body, even in kindness, like that is an unwanted assault on my personhood, on my physical body. And so as a woman reading that story, it's why interpretation and expansive interpretation is important to our exegetical processes, because I will always see, I'm not a David fan. Like, I can give him grace, and I love the way in which we are called to do so and be like, oh, like he did some good. But there will always be a part of me that is like, but because he also never apologizes, and there's no reconciliation. I'm willing to give grace and work in that currency of grace for for everyone, to be really honest. But there's got to be contrition, there's got to be lament, and he never does. So,
and so like it is this level of dirty hands that God is made to work with, that does amazing things for a nation, right? That literally is in the lineage of our Savior. And not the immediate child, because that child dies, but the child after, from that illicit relationship, right? Like, is this God reclaiming some level of notoriety, persistence, and stands for her? He took you, but I'll make him now not take you, but you'll always be part of, right? Like, who knows how one could see the story, right, from God's, but David, is this guy who writes poems. He is this guy who defeats Goliath. He's the one that does not kill Saul the anointed, even though he has the chance. So many wonderful things. But he's also this guy caught in this moment.
He's complex.
And for me, I think it's Kendrick, right? It's the complexities of Kendrick.
Yeah.
It is the complexity, I think, of faithful life, that none of us are ever as holy as we may want to be. And, Jesus elevates our level. He says, if you've even thought it, you've done it. So even the best of us that have not done it in life have thought things that if they were able to be put up on a screen and people knew, we would be under
hard pass. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Hard pass, right?
Hard pass.
It's
Man,
but I see the David Kendrick thing very much so. Like if we remove the absolute worst, right? Because again, what Kendrick is calling us to do is to say the very worst of us and the very best of us are not the things in which we have to reside or even can reside. And I think David very much does that too. The very worst of him and the very best of him held together gives us a bit more of that full picture, and that we don't, Kendrick has some lyrics that very much are apologetic. And I like to think in order to move forward in relationship with David through scripture, that David just didn't know that he needed to apologize, right? Like that there's a learning curve for all of us. And so I think good music, good art, good story, like as it reflects the cultures that it comes from, also gives us touchstones for how in which we can move forward because of how we have reconciled.
Right.
I love it. And the best of us is the worst of us, and the worst of us is the best of us.
Correct.
Like that's the full person.
Correct.
I mean, that's just scripture.
I'm going to throw out my answer. I don't know if you know this, Jason, but I'm very into the Corinthian letters of Paul. I've been studying them for 3 years. 15th chapter of First Corinthians talks about bodily resurrection. And it's one of my favorite things because Paul is literally just trying to say it's not resuscitation. Resurrection is not resuscitation. And if we keep resuscitating the body continues to function as it does. The resurrected body, the butterfly the caterpillar liquefies in the cocoon. It is no longer what it was. It is something else entirely. So I'm going to point to 1 Corinthians 15 as my answer for this. Kendrick is pointing us to resurrection, which requires holding in tension what is and also seeking out what can be.
Yeah. I think that's really good. In fact, To Pimp a Butterfly initially was going to be renamed To Pimp a Caterpillar. And two was going to be spelled T-U. It was going to be the initials of Tupac.
Ooh, okay.
Right? So like we have this weird kind of space. And then, there have been all this history of him, being Machiavelli, him really still being alive. Like it's all of this stuff. But he shifts it because there's a beauty and a lightness which is in direct opposition to the word pimp that better exemplified the story as much as the Tupac idea was good. And so as we talk about like this, not resuscitation, but literal resurrection, the butterfly is the best or one of the best images that we have. It is essentially the same thing, but it's altogether different. Functions differently, moves differently, looks differently. Not expected, but it's the view of it changes the way that the viewer sees it differently. Like a caterpillar is like, oh, yuck. The butterfly is when a butterfly flies over your head, you feel like you've been blessed, right? Like it lands on your shoulder. You're like this, I must be wonderful, right? Like everything.
Oh my gosh, so sorry.
So I think that's real. Like how, and maybe a bigger question is, how do we live into that level of resurrection? I pray that all of that level of resurrection doesn't have to happen upon death, but what parts of butterfly can be happening in life, right? That we too can live into this newness. So the things of old, the thoughts of old, the patterns of old really can be put to death. And then these new butterfly, free, light things can come to life. under the power of God and within the communities that he's placed us.
10,000%. I mean, the butterfly to pimp, you take pimp and butterfly, right? One is the controller and
Right.
the controlling, and one is absolutely unrestrained.
Free. Right.
And free. And so I think, the duality of both of those things is the gospel. It is that we are, for lack of a better, I guess, term, we're pimped in our humanness, right? Like that we are, that is the controlled part of who we are. It's not our spirit. It's not what it is. It's the communities that keep us controlled. It's our own understandings of ourselves that keep us controlled. And yet, when we get a life in Christ, when we understand what Jesus is doing, we can, that butterfly nature that is within all of us is set free, and does not and should not be a death or to be experienced and necessary only in death. I think the butterfly does not die within its pupa stage. It is just gooed up and then liberated. And gooed up is the correct terminology, I do believe.
Absolutely, definitely the scientific term.
Yeah,
that's what Paul uses in 1 Corinthians 15.
And we turn to Paul for our scientific facts on butterflies. I'll go with my. I struggled with how I was going to answer this last question, but I think I'm going to go with Joseph and his coat of many colors.
Okay.
There is something new and anointed in that space that names what we all can name it, and yet it doesn't get brought up again. It lives in a really particular place because we're comfortable with it in that place. And yet the lineage and the stories live on. And I think what Kendrick is really doing, I think he has created his own coat. I think he is saying, look what else is possible. Look at the color and the dimension and that coat would have been made from different travels and experiences and people's different garment, like how it would have actually come together in its actual nature, is a bit what I see on Kendrick's, EPs and mixtapes and all of that. It's the things that come together that say there is something more. It's just whether or not we're willing to buy into it and say, yes, and I too want that moreness.
I love it.
So that's
well, friends, this has been a deep dive into Kendrick Lamar on 2-on-1. We are brought to you by Jeff Wunrow Designs. Jeff Wunrow celebrating 16 years of making ordinary time extraordinary. Go to jeffwunrow.com, jeffwunrow.com for 15 and use our discount code 2on115 for 15% off your entire Stole order. Hey, also coming out October 25 is Are You Still Watching? Using pop culture to find God, tune in, and get renewed for another season.
Tune in, find God, and get renewed for another season.
So Jason Reynolds is one of our contributors, and we're super excited about that. You'll have to tune in October to find out what he's written about, but pre-order it now at chalicepress.com. Anyways, on behalf of 2-on-1, I'm the Reverend Arthur Stewart.
I'm the Reverend Stephanie Kendall.
And I'm Reverend Jason Reynolds.
And we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Bye.
Get more 2-on-1 at 2on1project.com.